Thank you very much for your participation in that. That was fun. It's an honor to be here. I'm a designer and entrepreneur. I was trained in classical piano, played Chopin, Debussy between ages 6 and 16, and I'm still looking for a great drum teacher if you're out there. Today I'm sharing with you ideas and stories about creating integrated holistic teams. We'll look at the signals that the design and tech industries, much like society, has reached a tipping point. I'll share a lot of resources with you. They're all already on my site. My name is joshsilverman.com/designthinkers. And that there's a lot of ways to resolve the issues that we're experiencing today. But first, let's look at the parallels between music and design. Here we have a few musical terms. I feel there are parallels with each kind of term in design. Much like harmony, the state of flow, when you're in a great collaboration, everything just flows. Much like rhythm, you can think about rhythm in the design world as cadence or timing, frequency of even meetings. Silence. Silence is just as important as the notes. Think of Beethoven's Fifth, which goes dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. So that moment between notes is just as important as the notes themselves. Phrases are like gestures. Phrases are clusters of notes that are repeated throughout a piece. Gestures are similar when you're navigating an interface. We might think of them as components. When you put pitch and melody into the composition, you can put the same kinds of ideas into a project brief, something that contains all the elements. And lastly, the key is kind of like the design system. It's how everything fits together: sharps, flats, major, and minor. So who is it that looks across and understands the whole? Conductors. Conductors pull everything together. The role of a conductor is to enable musicians to be more emotionally expressive and to guide an overall experience. So it's not a stretch to think about strings, percussion, horns, winds as teams. Conductors are a lot like operations people. We see the players individually, and we orchestrate teams to achieve a greater whole. Here's how I've done that in my career. My first business was a network of individuals in business and strategy. I called it Schwa Design. Whether the project team called for 2, 3 to 5 was our sweet spot, or even 25, we could assemble project-specific teams, so I was the orchestrator and curator of these teams. We worked with startups, and I saw patterns of decision-making that needed to get to value faster. So my second business was called Startnership, which is a portmanteau of startup and partnership. So I put those needs into repeatable workshops and started my second business. Lately, I've been running a lot of critiques. I'll get to this in a minute. Inside Twitter, I ran the critique program. I maybe saw 500 critiques, and I saw a lot of terrible critiques. So I put the best practices of critique into a kit, and that is called critkit.co. I've also worked in-house. I was the first design operations person inside Twitter's product team. I was in-house at IBM as one of the founding designers of the Cloud Garage. More recently, I've consulted in design ops with fintech startup Blend, and a new team inside CRM giant Salesforce, along with Sequoia Venture Capital's Design Lab. So Sequoia Venture Capital has a lot of early stage startups, and they have a design team in-house, which is brilliant, run by a man named James Buckhouse. Loved working with James. Most recently, I've been helping the Gallatin School at NYU, which is a school of individualized study, which is amazing. They called me and said, we need help with our design operations, our teams aren't working well together, and I started asking bigger picture questions to understand that they really need a through line of content strategy and how to tell their story. So that's where I'm coming from. I happened to find recently my second business card. It's right here. And I didn't know when I made this business card in 1999 that I would consider myself a communication orchestrator, but there it is. So throughout all of my work, and before we dive in further, I'd like to define the level of design work that I'm interested in. For the past 25 years, I've moved from designing at the aesthetic layer into systems and designing teams and tools for teams. I still consider that designing, even though it's not aesthetic. Collectively, I refer to this as the people layer. The people layer is the most complex, deepest layer of any organization. It's a layer of interaction that persists beyond changes in aesthetics, UX, UI, operating systems, tools, code stacks, and trends. It's independent of any single individual, and by default, everyone you work with is involved. The design and tech industry have a lot of challenges right now. Here are just a few highlights. Lori says, the older I get, the more every problem in tech seems to be a matter of getting humans to work together effectively and not the tech itself. People love to chase tech. People love to chase numbers and focus on code. If you're spending a lot of time looking at tech and chasing tech, you are actually avoiding the underlying people issues. This is from January in the Harvard Business Review. I'm glad that they called it in January, but I think the era of move fast and break things ended well before January. It kind of reminds me of the first .com boom, where we had things like pets.com and things that were just sort of like vaporware. It feels like it's happening again in a different format. Hustle culture has absolutely left an impact, and we are shifting away from that now. If you're working in a company that's larger than, say, 20 people, chances are there are separate teams for brand and product. Even if you think, or you think in a holistic way, you may be forced to choose between these two teams. As you scale, there might be a false dichotomy of choosing between brand and product that undermines your ability to be a systems thinker, to collaborate effectively, and to bring experiences from across teams to life. And that really sucks. Let's talk about job titles. Can you figure out which one of these fall into the brand or product dichotomy? Which one is digital? Which one is physical? Probably not, right? There are so many job titles that are disjointed, stacked on top of each other. Experience designer, product designer, designer, art director. What do they mean? What are the qualities? It seems like the industry is looking for a flying dolphin to do them all. So Annie tweeted this in March, and she didn't know this at the time, but her tweet inspired a conference called Joint Futures that I was just at in Helsinki about 2 months ago. It was a fantastic holistic design conference, but we took the flying dolphin and we added a unicorn horn on it, and it became the mascot of Joint Futures. Where are the product people in the house? The snappers. Cool, glad to hear from you. How often do you all meet with customers? Do you know them by name? Do you know why they choose or hire in the jobs to be done framework, why they hire your product over others? Does everyone, not just the managers, does everyone on your team collaborate with brand? If not, there's a problem right there. When you start with a product-centered mindset, it poses a few challenges, and I've worked in a lot of product teams, and I've seen these challenges over and over. In a product-centered mindset, other teams may not feel centered or aligned. Features and product features change rapidly with prototyping and feedback. There's more iteration at the product level than at the brand level. Here's one example to illustrate this. The man in the center of this image is a co-founder of a startup called Logobase. They were 6 months into building their product's back end and trying to raise a round of seed capital. But as they met with investors and pitched individually and together, they kept coming up against some challenges. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know what they stood for or what they would fall for. They didn't know how to tell their story. So investors were turning them away because they didn't have an internal alignment. By starting with a product-centric mindset, they skipped over some fundamental business needs. So they called in me, Margot Bloomstein on the left, and John Kerwin, a designer on the right, for a 2-day workshop. That's the co-founder doing a card sorting exercise. He's pointing to a word that represents what they stand for as part of this exercise to determine message architecture, content strategy, and what they stood for. What is their story? So once you start with that story, once you find out your purpose, why you're solving the problems, why you founded your business in the first place, building everything else becomes easier and more focused. It might take a revolution to integrate teams. Here are a few signs that that is starting to happen. Let's look at the brand and product dichotomy another way. A brand may have multiple products, but a product cannot have multiple brands. Even a white-labeled product is white-labeled to be in service of another brand. A brand honors the promise of a product, but when brand is at the core, including core value, purpose, what makes you distinct, you can most easily apply that to everything else. This is the holistic view. In organizations, brand values are conveyed through everything, from the user experience to employee onboarding and company culture. This is the position from which business should integrate design. Inside most businesses, especially product companies in Silicon Valley, it's a different story. Product engineering and design should start a project at the same time. Parker is willing to die on this hill, to give up his life, just to collaborate. It shouldn't take death just to be aligned internally. That's what we're facing these days. The brand and product dichotomy reminds me of another cognitive shift: geocentrism versus heliocentrism. Geocentrism, we used to think the Earth was the center of the universe. How selfish, right? When we talk about not shipping your org chart, maybe we should talk about it more like don't ship your star chart. So heliocentrism won out because it's not the Earth that's the center of the universe. The customer, the most important person in a lot of businesses, the customer does not know how your company is structured. The customer should not notice whether something is coming from the brand team or the product team or the marketing team. Heliocentrism shifted our view. It's proof that we can let go of dominant ideologies. Speaking of views of the universe, a couple months ago, my friend Tatiana Mack, who's here for the ALI-TO conference as well, Tatiana presented at Clarity, a design systems conference in San Francisco in August, a scale to zoom out and consider global contexts. In your next standing meeting, see if you can zoom out. See if you can zoom out from the project you're working on to the brand and even long-term relationships. These relationships that you have with your coworkers will outlast the project you're working on, the meeting you're in, and perhaps even the company you work for. If you can't zoom out, you may be paying too much attention to the notes. You might miss the music. And I know we heard a little bit about this in this morning's keynote, about conductors and relationships. So I firmly believe in that. Here's another sign that the shift is taking place. Humane by Design is a wonderful resource by John Jablonski. It covers principles of transparency, respect, process, and more. And it's all under the umbrella of humane design. I'm also seeing a timely and necessary rise of coaching and leadership services. I myself have been doing some coaching, and it feels great to be able to help designers along their career path. It's fun and rewarding to be a reflection of what I see. I've helped designers get jobs, I've helped designers interview, and I've helped design leaders get better at their jobs. This is Donna Lee Shaw, based in New York. She helps product design, engineering, marketing, and operations leaders, especially women, LGBTQ, and those who do not fit traditional models of leadership in tech and tech-adjacent fields unlock their potential. So this is great. I want more of it. Similarly, the two female co-founders of Inside Out, a women-only leadership incubator, have co-created programming relevant to all women and non-binary individuals. So zooming out, considering relationships, holistic design principles and resources, and coaching, these are all signs that a revolution is happening. In a broader societal context, a similar shift is taking place. I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg protesting climate change, and before Greta, we had Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg protesting gun violence. 6 months ago, Vox covered the two female leaders who organized a November walkout of 20,000 Google employees worldwide to protest the company's sexual harassment policies and the payouts that were made to the male employees to leave. This article quotes the shifting levers of power in the organization. This is from a few months ago in the New York Times. The Business Roundtable that is mentioned here is responding to the zeitgeist and updating their decades-old language. It's nice that it's happening, but there's a challenge because it's just strategies right now, but it's still a relief to see. More recently, from a few weeks ago, CEOs of companies are departing at a record pace, especially in tech. There have been 159 departures through last month, up 21% from last year. Adam, who's cut off at the bottom, maybe he cut himself off. He's the co-founder, or actually he's the founder of WeWork. He got paid $2 billion to leave WeWork at the same time that 2,200 WeWork employees were let go. Doing the math, that's $850,000 per employee. It's pretty terrible. Why is this happening? Perhaps extreme regulatory scrutiny, alleged anti-competitive practices. It feels to me like there are greater forces afoot that we're seeing in drips and drabs right now. This is a quote from my hero, Debbie Millman. People make their own brands now, not for profit or shareholder value, but for a mission, for a movement. This shifts, and along with a lot of other shifts, it shifts power and control to the individual. One of my favorite examples of this shift is a few years old, but it's a very powerful one, since it echoes all of the tenets of Debbie's quote. It's a mission, a movement, not for profit, but shifting power and a lot of visibility to the individual. Can anyone guess what it is? Took place in the US 2016 in response to the elections. What? Marches, say more. Tons of marches, people getting off their couches, yes. In particular, I'm thinking of Pussy Hats. Who's familiar with Pussy Hat Project? Great, you knitters out there, kudos to you. The Pussy Hat Project, if you're not familiar, stems from the actual words spoken by our terrible president in the US, Donald J. Trump, and it co-opts the words and turns them around. 3 women were inspired to make and open source the design for these pink hats in advance of the protests and the marches in January of 2017. So this one project raises awareness, advances human rights, and promotes empowerment through arts, education, and craft. I love that they open sourced the design. So yes, people are getting up off their couches, making signs, knitting, and taking action. This inspires me very much to witness the democratization of branding. So this ability to take the idea, any idea, into reality starts with one person or a small group of people, which spreads until dozens and ultimately hundreds of thousands of people become ambassadors of an idea, movement, and brand. You couldn't ask for a better picture of integrated teamwork. This is a photo from a women's march showing a sea of pussy hats. And what I'm suggesting to you this morning is that this is powerful bottom-up branding made by people. So here's how we can carry this kind of entrepreneurial spirit forward. Evolution actually starts with E, but I actually think it starts with you. Here are some resources and ideas on how to remediate, become more holistic in your thinking and doing, and more evolved in your collaboration. I've selected 7 of my favorite resources to share with you. There are a lot more on my site. And I'm going to move from individual things you can do to group and cross-company activities. Many of you, if not most of you, took planes to get here, right? So let's say there's a change in cabin pressure and oxygen masks drop. What do you do? Help yourself first. You win. Free oxygen mask for you. Before you help others, you have to help yourself first. So Love First by my friend Farouk Atesh is a mindset and set of principles for loving yourself. And like RuPaul reminds us, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anyone else? Without loving yourself, the well you draw from in life will eventually run dry, leaving you strained and exhausted. In other words, burnout. If you're wondering how this fits into the workplace, Farouk says that your relationships with your coworkers are either the thing you'll miss when you leave or the reason for your leaving. Imagine a world in which your manager has checked in with themselves and has clear and articulated intentions for themselves and leads their team to do the same. Resource number 2, ask yourself under which conditions do you perform best? Are you a morning person like me, with peak energy between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m.? Or do you prefer strategy kickoffs at 4 o'clock on a Friday? Probably not. Under which conditions do you prefer to be communicated with? Text, DM, Slack, HipChat, if anyone still uses that, GChat, email, tap on the shoulder. All these channels are ways in which we can be communicated with. If you have a preference for one, you can publish it and share it with your team. This is one of my favorite tools by Cassie Robinson. She calls it a user manual for herself. She articulates things she loves, things she struggles with, conditions she likes to work in, times and hours she likes to work in, best ways to communicate with her. Can you imagine what this would be like if you had it filled out for yourself? She's open sourced it, and there's a link to it on my site. I love this tool. I'd like to add that one thing you could work with in your team is, are you the kind of designer that wants to go from 0 to 1? In other words, do you have a blank field to play with? Or are you the kind of designer or creator who wants to go from 1 to 1,000,000? There are many types of creatives and designers, but if you know which one you are, then you can collaborate best with others. Being a multiplier. To be a T-shaped person is to have T-shaped skills. A T is made of 2 lines. The vertical line is deep expertise in a single field. The horizontal line is the ability to collaborate across. This idea was originated by David Guest and McKinsey in the 80s and popularized by Tim Brown in the 90s. Well, I'm here to tell you today that T is for tired. I propose instead X-shaped, cross-disciplinary, intersectional. Brand is product, marketing is operations. See where I'm going with that? And so we are the origin that we want. X marks the spot. And I think it looks more like a person jumping for joy. Y'all do more than one thing, right? Cool. All of this is made possible by having a growth mindset. The difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset is that growth treats failure as opportunity. Growth is open. Growth is, I like to try things. I like to experiment. I like to grow. Fixed mindsets are categorized by being stuck. And if you have a fixed mindset, there is still an opportunity to convey change to having a growth mindset. We are obsessed with failure. Fail, fail, fail. But here's a secret. Failure is data. This is a sketch note from someone who heard me say that and made this pie chart. The more we learn, the better off we are. Did you know that Sir James Dyson, the inventor of the bagless vacuum cleaner, took 15 years and made 5,127 prototypes. 5,000 prototypes over 15 years before he and his team arrived at a solution. The company is now worth $13.8 billion, so I'd say that's a good set of failure. Number 5, elevate your feedback and critique. Everyone needs feedback. It's directly related to a growth mindset, and how you respond to feedback is related to a growth mindset. If feedback is the broad conversation, critique is a subset with a specific purpose to advance a project and make better work. There are many types of feedback. Self-feedback, for example, here's what I did wrong, and I think what would work better. Supportive feedback, like critique. You might also experience inactionable or ineffective, maybe everyone's least favorite unsolicited feedback. Here in her critique of design thinking, Natasha Jen, who is here, says, design thinking without critique is bullshit. So it's true, I agree with Natasha. When we prototype ideas using design thinking, including critique can help improve your hypotheses. So there are 3 stages of feedback: requesting, providing, and integrating. The key to getting great feedback is the responsibility starts with the requester, not the provider. Here we see Sean from Twitter pointing to a board with a bunch of different options for layout. He's literally directing our attention. He's explicit on the type of feedback he needs and approaches it with open questions like, what I'm trying to figure out is. So as you can see, he's sharing a multitude of options, and he remains agnostic towards any one of them. Here we see Tina providing feedback. When she provides feedback, she starts by restating the problem, incorporating prior conversations and decisions that were made that builds trust. Rather than being prescriptive, she leads with open questions like, how might we? And how would you adjust X if Y were a concern? She makes it about the work and not the person. She refers to the work as the work and not your work or your design. Finally, integrating feedback. Signaling that you're going to do something about the feedback you just received is integration. Here's what it takes to integrate feedback. Number 1, self-awareness, being in touch with your feelings. Number 2, empathy, that you value the other person's perspective. Number 3, listening and not interrupting, giving the person speaking your full attention. Notice in this photo, only one person is speaking, and that's the woman who's holding the phone on the couch. This is a critique at Twitter made up of designers, project managers, product managers, and only one person is holding the phone. Number 4, acknowledging what the other person said and paying attention. Number 5, vulnerability, being comfortable in the state in which you may receive input. Number 6, trusting the person providing feedback has positive intent because opinions are not actionable. And number 6, a bias towards action. We can change behavior. We can make an impact and iteration on a project. Number 6, the other things you can do to integrate include making your process visible. Design is never done. There will always be a new tool, more customer insight, a new typeface. So because design is never done, you must enjoy the process. Even trust the process, but be sure to have a process and socialize it. So this is a couple of examples from one of my favorite websites, designfuckingthinking.tumblr.com. It's just a collection of ideas and charts of what design thinking looks like and process diagrams. Here's where design thinking sits. Here's a 5-step process using rounded cornered boxes. Here's the famous double diamond with 2 half diamonds tacked on at the end. Here's a fun roller coaster from Gartner. They get more and more complex. I don't know if I would be able to survive this. And this is my favorite. The point of all these is that it does not matter whether you use triangles or rounded corner squares or you are actually on a roller coaster. It doesn't matter what it looks like as long as it's shared and understood. Diverse, inclusive teams are my favorite kind of teams. We have more in common with each other than not. 99.9% of everyone's DNA is the same. Diverse teams are also 35% more likely to have increased financial returns. That's from a 2015 McKinsey report. Working with people who are different from you makes you smarter by challenging patterns in your brain and helping you overcome existing biases and ways of thinking. Cognitive diversity is another kind of diversity that's also a boon to innovation. And diverse teams are a lot more fun. A quote from Candy, who is the VP of Diversity and Partnership Strategies at Twitter: "Diversity and design share the purpose of creating for someone else. If you're only creating for one kind of user, you're not affecting as much change as you could." Friends, there's so much work to be done right now. This morning, I've shared with you a few of my favorite resources, strategies, and tactics. Now it is up to us, individually and collectively, to do the work. And I hope that we can go beyond just doing the work to something greater. The performance of a piece of music is not the goal. It's the vehicle for the audience. Inspiration is the goal. I love this quote from a conductor. Similarly, once we are individually centered, only then can we lean into our work from an integrated, holistic way. When we look up and across from our day-to-day project work and we pay more attention to relationships, then we can become more inspired. As we are now in the midst of a reset towards people-centered tech and society, what this means is now it's a terrific time to focus more on what persists. Thank you very much.